We're still in Art History 497X. It is May 8th, and so now we are getting to the actual assignments that you have for today. So hopefully you've been tracking along and you figured out how to center your creature. You figured out how to get your creature sort of set up in a set up and draw loop. And once you've done that, you're all ready to start playing with some of the interactivity games that we can play. And so we are going to basically undo now a bunch of the centering we've done. But remember, one of the important steps of getting your creature centered was actually making your entire creature co-relational. That's the important bit, because if you want the creature to be able to move, the creature has to understand itself and all of its various parts in relationship to itself, not necessarily in relationship to the graph paper behind it. Those two things are, of course, related, but this is the difference between sort of creating an object that understands itself in terms of itself versus an object that understands itself only in terms of its environment, right? I hope that makes sense. It's a really important concept. And the reason it's really important is because only if something is correlational can you start playing around with it by making sort of certain parts of it dependent on something interactive. Like in our case, it's going to be a mouse position, but you could also make it interactive, to a sensor. So, a mouse is just a kind of a sensor. So anytime you can create sort of that co-relational environment, you can then make it dependent on input coming from the outside. And that right there is the importance of a variable. Because when you start to allow those variable packets, so those little file boxes that are made, if those can be input by someone besides you, you've just created something interactive. And that's a really important part about computation. So what are we going to do here? Well, we're basically going to think about before what we were calling sort of center X and center Y. And if you went ahead and defined those variables with float, that was one way you could do it. I took the easy way out and just did width divided by 2 and just kept typing all that code. That was sort of silly of me. But because we weren't doing a terribly difficult mathematical exercise right there, I could kind of get away with it. Probably it's actually smarter to have gone ahead if you did a float cent X and a float cent Y variable definition. That was actually the highest sort of order you could get to in the assignment. But we're basically going to go through now and change that, and we're going to change it to mouse X and mouse Y so that we're interactive. We're going to leave everything the same up here, and we're just going to play around right now in the draw sequence. And so remember that width has to do with X and height has to do with Y. So I'm just going to go through here in a way that's a little bit tedious. It'd be so nice if I had a loop to do this. And I'm just going to type the command mouse X. Every time I see width divided by 2, I no longer want it to be width divided by 2, because remember that was the little operation it was running in order to find the center of whatever paper I wanted. And instead, I'm going through and very carefully clicking where it says width divided by 2, and I'm replacing it with mouse divided by 2. Now, in some cases, you can just double click these things, but when you've got a little like if you had done cent X, this is going to be a lot easier for you than it is for me. Because I did the mathematics, I have to be sure I get that divide by in there. And so I have to make sure I get it all, because I want my entire creature to move. Now, you don't have to get it all. If you wanted just one part of your creature to move, you could. You could just have your head sit still, and you could have, well, in this case, we've sort of done that code right now. So we've got our body and legs are now interactive, but everything else isn't. So let's see what that looks like. He's decapitated. And because we've only done mouse X right now, we haven't done mouse Y, I only can move him back and forth, right? Interesting, huh? So there's one step. I'm going to go through because, like I say, my goal is kind of a boring goal. You can get way more creative than this than me, but my goal is just that I want my whole little guy to follow my mouse around. So I'm going through with all of these. See there, I whoops, made it even more of a hassle for myself. You can see why having the variable, even though I'm paying for my previous laziness, we had simply gone through the hassle of declaring that variable and floated cent x as width divided by 2, and then use cent x instead, you can see how much you would have saved yourself, because you could just double click and you'd be able to replace those variables really, really easily. Okay, I think I've got them all. I don't see any more widths. Now I need to do the same thing with all of my heights, only instead of mouse x, I want it to be mouse y. So we'll just copy that. I'm just going through here and pasting all those values. And the danger with this, and the reason why you have to be so careful, is if you accidentally delete one of those pluses or minuses, you're going to screw everything up, right? So you have to be careful here. See, I got a 2 there still, but at least it showed up blue, so I knew I hadn't done something correctly. You can see, though, that once you get your entire object correlational, look at how much easier this action is than it was for you to move from your original drawing to the centered drawing. That was the big step. That making everything correlational was the hard part. So this actually is, even though it's sort of tedious, intellectually it's a lot easier than having to figure out all those numbers again. Okay, I think that should do it. So let's see how we've done here. There we go. There is our guy. Awesome. And so now he's tracking around with my mouse. And if I move slowly, you can see that frame refresh is making his little legs and everything come out as a black sort of trail for him. But if I move fast, you can sort of get separation. You can also remember before the difference when we changed where the background was. So if we stop this and just change where we want to draw our background, and if we do it here instead, hit play again, should be predicting what the difference is, and hopefully you said you were just going to see the one creature, or the one creature, and he was just going to track around with the mouse. So that's great. One other thing you could do with this is work with mouse pressed commands instead. And what you could do there is just, stop this here, mouse pressed is another sort of command like the void draw command. So let's just zero out basically this void draw command like this, and instead we're going to do a void mouse pressed command. So we're using the exact same code, but instead of saying draw it on an infinite loop, we're saying draw this only when the mouse is pressed, right? By zeroing this out, we could do this a couple ways. We've basically said there's no code to execute here, so nothing's going to happen. The other thing we could do here is we could comment this whole thing out and just void it out, and that would ignore it. But since we've gotten rid of the code here, it's basically going to have the same result. So now we launch, and we've got a blank screen, and no matter what I do with my mouse, nothing happens. But the minute I click, I draw a little guy. And because I've got the background in there, I erase the guy that was there before. How might you imagine what has to change if I want every time I click, I want a guy and I want him to stay? So eventually I have like 100 guys on my screen. What would be, it's really one simple thing. Huge change in how the program is understood. One action within the program, and you tell me what it is. Hopefully what you said was just move that background back into the setup, and that would have been exactly right. Okay, so that's the basic gist of what you're doing when you make your creature interactive. So that is the first assignment, and again, you can be really creative. It doesn't have to follow the mouse the way I did. You could make just the head follow the mouse, for instance, or you could make just the arms, the hands and the feet follow the mouse. So it's sort of like reaching out towards the mouse. Um, and you can also remember, I haven't discussed this, but in the book you've got that pmouse X command as well. And so then you sort of can create some other effects. All of those things are fun to play with, and I encourage you to do that. Okay, so that's this lesson.